everyone. Pastor George here with today's Bible study recap. And today in Bible study, we looked at 2 Kings chapter 21 through 23:30. So a lot of ground to cover here, right? But I really wanted to do a compare and contrast because so much of the book of Kings is about what kings do well and what they don't. And essentially, what we're doing is we're going to compare the worst king of Judah by the author's own insistence and the best king of Judah, also the highest one that's praised by the author. And so the worst one is a guy named Manasseh. The best one is Josiah. And I wanted to compare these things, and so we could see what the biblical record is for what a good king is, and how that often runs up or maybe against our knowing of kind of like what we might desire in a political leader. So first thing is Manasseh. Manasseh is the longest reigning king, which is pretty interesting. He is considered the worst king of Judah. So this is the southern kingdom. By this point in the narrative, the northern kingdom of Israel has already been destroyed. So the only Hebrew kingdom left is the kingdom of Judah in the south, with its capital at Jerusalem. Okay. So he's the longest reigning king of Judah, which is crazy to think about because, again, if you're thinking bad king, you'd think he'd be gone pretty quickly. But no, he reigns a long time. 55 years is a huge amount of time to be on the throne. We get antsy if a president is in for 2 terms, let alone 55 years, right? So he does everything that a good king should not do, right? He builds all of these pagan altars. He builds these temples. The author relates him to Ahab. Ahab was the king in Israel, right? Who went against Elijah and did a lot of these same things like that, right? Something that you do not see through all of this, right, is you just see him building altars, but you don't understand the economic. Maybe you do. I shouldn't say you don't. You might. But under that is this economic thing that is going on, which means like you need money to do that, right? You can't just actually build this stuff easily and willy-nilly. It takes a lot of time and skill, and you need to have priests who you need to pay to run these things or who get paid off of these things, right? So what's under the surface here, and I always think it's interesting, is that there does seem to be economic prosperity with these guys as well, which is interesting to think about. So anyway, he not only just builds these other things, he also builds pagan altars inside the Jerusalem temple. So inside the Temple of Solomon, he puts up these statues of the Asherah and all these other types of things, right? And so what God does is, in the face of this, he says, I'm going to destroy the kingdom of Judah. This is kind of the straw that broke the camel's back. It's because of Manasseh that I will destroy the kingdom of Judah and send people off into exile. And we read that this morning. And so God sends prophets, right, to call this out. But they don't. Of course, Manasseh doesn't listen to him. It makes this one offhanded comment. It says, "Moreover, Manasseh shed very much innocent blood till he had filled Jerusalem with one end to the other." And that's what God says. So Manasseh also seems to be killing people. Probably, although it doesn't say it, what I would guess is that these are the prophets that is being sent, or people that worship God who are being killed by Manasseh. And then Manasseh dies, right? After 55 years, he dies. Not really anything special about his death. Not like Ahab, right? Well, then we have him buried in a garden, which might mean that he is not well liked because all the other kings were buried in Jerusalem, but we don't know that. It might have been actually a great thing. That's just conjecture. He has a son named Amon. Amon reigns 2 years. He's overthrown by the people. They don't like him. They kill him, and they put on a new king, and this king is Josiah. And Josiah is one of the descendants of David. And so they want to find a good king. Again, there's this, under the surface, there's this desire to find this future king that'll be even better than David. And of course, as Christians, we see this fulfilled in Christ. But none of the kings truly live up to this. But in the eyes of the person who edited and compiled together 2 Kings, Josiah is the best, right? Who wrote, edited, compiled. I think it's kind of all 3 of those because they're drawing from different sources. So Josiah was 8 years old when he began to reign. So not a good place to start, right? And he reigns 31 years, which is quite some time. Um, and it says that he walked in all the ways of David, his father. Of course, David's not his father, but his ancestor. And he did not turn aside to the right or to the left. That's just a poetic way of saying he didn't turn away from the Lord, right? And the interesting thing here is that Josiah begins to press against the Assyrian dominance over his land. So this is a independent kingdom, but the way that this kind of works at this time is, yes, you're independent, but you're paying tribute, basically protection money, to kingdoms around you. And in the case of Judah, this is to Assyria, which was the big bad guy in the region. They're actually on the decline at this point. They've started to decline. Babylon is becoming the rising power. You have Egypt in the south. We'll talk more about Egypt in a second. But Josiah is pushing because Assyria is decreasing. He's pushing and saying, "Oh, maybe I can get more stuff and land." You actually see him be able to do this, and also not pay the tributes in full, probably, because you'll see here the first thing he does is he repairs the temple, which is amazing, right? And this, we know that he cares about this, right? So he wants the temple rebuilt. But what happens when they're rebuilding the temple is what really shapes his reign, because they end up finding a book of the law that's there. And this is probably Deuteronomy, based on how it's being quoted and what it talks about in the text and what he does. So they find a copy of Moses' speech, Deuteronomy, to the Israelites before they go into the promised land. And this changes Hilkiah. Sorry, not Hilkiah. Hilkiah is the priest that finds it. This changes Josiah's reign, right? So what happens is that they figure this out, and then they go to a prophetess, and this prophetess named Huldah tells them what they have to do, right? And that God is going to relent for a time being on Judah because of Josiah's goodness. And so what Josiah does is he leads them in a renewing of the covenant. This is something that happens lots of times in the Old Testament. Joshua does this. Other people do this. This is a way of centering the people back. And what happens is that they then go through and they destroy all the idols that Manasseh had built in all these places. Even other kings had failed. Some good kings have failed to do this, but Josiah succeeds. Ultimately, you'll notice that there's all sorts of different references and things in here, but you'll notice that they especially destroy this place called Tophet. This is where infants were sacrificed, and this is actually in the valley that it's called Ben Hinnom. Son of Hinnom is how my translation says it, but that would be, we know that in the New Testament as Gehenna, the burning place, right? This is like, the idea is that is where you would go to burn your children as sacrifices. This is actually something Manasseh does to one of his children, and that's destroyed. So I think, like, one of the things I really want to just remind people is, one of the common misconceptions is that people will say, "Oh, God, he's so cruel and evil, he uses the Israelites to wipe out the Canaanites who were doing stuff like that," right? Just remember that. They're not just sitting there plucking flowers, right? They're sacrificing children. We actually know that this is a practice because we found other Canaanite sites where we found the bodies of children who had been sacrificed. So anyway, they're doing this, but God, importantly, holds his people to the same standard, right? What's going to happen to Judah? Are they just going to go, "Oh, we're sorry, we're going to destroy it all," right? No, because there's still innocent blood that has been spilled, and Judah has to pay the price for that, and they will, right? Judah's going to be destroyed. But he goes back and he uses his power as king to destroy all these previous altars and shrines and things that these other kings have built in places they shouldn't, to gods they shouldn't, and he desecrates them. So you're going to see lots of spreading of ashes on bones. One of the interesting things is that he doesn't actually kill that many people. There's only one place in here that I found where he actually kills someone, which is interesting, because and this is what we would go back to just thinking about when I talked about the law code as a guideline, right? Just because it's a guideline doesn't mean, just because it says death doesn't mean it has to result in death, right? There can be other lesser punishments for it. For instance, these male cult prostitutes are not killed; they're just put out, right? But the interesting thing here is that there are some people who are, and this happens at a place up in northern what used to be Israel. So you can actually see Josiah's extended the reign up there, kind of militarily. So they're successful in their religious reforms in Josiah's reign, right? But they're not entirely successful all around, and you're going to see this in the way that Josiah dies. Oh yeah, it's in the north at Bethel that where he does this, and that's because Bethel was the first place that there's been this idolatry, and so he actually kills the priests who are there. But other than that, it's kind of interesting. It doesn't, you know, necessitate that he's killing a lot of people, which is interesting just in terms of the Bible. We often miss small details like that. So anyway, he goes through, he does all these things. This is considered very good by the writer of of Second Kings, right? But this isn't going to end the judgment that the Lord is bringing. You know, the author brings up the fact that the Lord did not turn from burning in his great wrath by which his anger was kindled against Judah, because all of the provocations with which Manasseh had provoked him. And the Lord said, I will remove Judah also out of my sight as I have removed Israel, and I will cast off this city that I have chosen, Jerusalem, and the house of which I said, my name shall be there. So he's talking about the temple and the city there. And so then it records Josiah's death, and Josiah dies in battle, which is kind of interesting because earlier Huldah says that he'll die in peace. That means peace with the Lord, clearly, right? Because he doesn't die in peace here. And so Pharaoh Necho of Egypt, is going up to fight against Assyria, or fight for Assyria, sorry. And Josiah goes to meet him, to stop him, right? This is, again, trying to destroy Assyria. No one likes Assyria. Josiah doesn't like Assyria, so he tries to lead a battle and win and defeat the Pharaoh, and he loses. He's killed at Megiddo, right? The Pharaoh defeats him and kills him, and then he's buried in his own tomb in Jerusalem, and then they have another king after that, and everything doesn't go quite so well. You can just read a few verses after what we read today. In verse 32, this is about Jehoaz. It says, and he did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, according to all that his fathers had done, which means that he went back to worshiping other gods, right? So I bring this up, right, because you can compare and contrast. You can see, okay, what makes a good king? Is it economic prosperity? Is it, being able to reign for a long time? Is it military conquests? Or is it following the Lord, right? In Deuteronomy, that's all, in Second Kings and in the king codes in Deuteronomy, that's all that matters, right? You're supposed to listen to the Lord and follow his statutes. That's what makes you a good king. So that's why Josiah is so well remembered and regarded, even though, like, I'm sure if you were living at the time, what you might say is like, oh, we were so much more economically prosperous under Manasseh. That means Manasseh was the better king. But that's not a good way of thinking about it, right? That I think, like, especially as Christians, we would say that it's important for us to care first about the morality of what's going on rather than whether or not we're prosperous. That's the more important thing. It's not easy to do that. It's not the place our hearts naturally go, but it's the type of place that Second Kings calls our hearts to go and what God reminds us about. So really interesting. I hope you guys found that insightful, and I will see you tomorrow for an episode of A New Thing. I'm going to be gone next week on vacation, so no Bible study, no new thing, but I'll see you 2 weeks from now. So hope you have a wonderful rest of your Wednesday, and peace out.